All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined from across the pond, as they like to say here in the UK, in London, by the London area, by Marc Adams. How are you doing, Marc?
Hey, John, it's a privilege to be here. Thanks so much for having me on. And it's
Yeah,
not so warm and sunny over this side of the pond as it is over that side of the pond, that's for sure.
yeah, no, absolutely. Although my relatives in Ireland have been telling me they've been having a bit of a heat wave. So,
Yeah, we've had our 3 days. That'll cut us in for the year.
yeah, exactly.
Whereas your 3 days of rain are probably yet to come.
Yeah. And probably not consecutively either. And so, Mark, you're the author of Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free. You have a wealth of experience, nearly 4 decades in business. And you overcome some health issues as well
Yeah.
on your journey as well. But your work focuses on helping entrepreneurs scale businesses to 100 million in value within 7 years and exit tax-free. And as we wanted to talk about it a little bit today, first of all, the book, right? Your Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free. Um, Tell me the journey to writing that book.
Oh, John, where do I start? It's terrible to say I've been around for 4 decades because obviously it ages me somewhat for sure.
Hmm.
But the trigger point for the book was something that happened when I was chatting with my son, who at the time, his name is Thomas, at the time he was 10. So if I take you back with me to 2020, January 2020, I was actually at LAX airport, or rather overlooking the runway from one of the hotels.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not quite the pandemic. It was coming. We'd heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was having a conversation with with one of my clients actually, and Rick, he's about 6'4". He's built like an American double fridge freezer. And actually, thinking about it, a fridge describing him is a more apt description than, I hope he doesn't listen to this because he's going to shoot me afterwards. But it's quite an apt description because not only is he built like a huge linebacker, I guess you'd call
Mm-hmm.
him, but he can be a bit cold and frosty at times. But when you open the fridge up, there's a lot of goodies inside him. He's got a heart of gold, but he can be quite off-putting. But we're talking about growth in his business, and he runs a privately held business, which he started himself. He's already at 800 million, or he was then. So growing 80 million in a year, as you and I would know, at that level seems easy, but it's not. And
No.
he could cover half of it, from organic growth, but he was wondering about how he's going to get the other half. So when we were talking about this, I just said, look, we could help you with that because we'll just go out and acquire other companies, position them, and sell them back to you, which is pretty much what we did. But but a couple of weeks later, he called me and said, look, we stop because I need that growth this year. Because when you're going through a growth phase like that, it takes a couple of years. And that was a bit of a nightmare for me because we'd already started I'd already sunk 35 grand in repositioning the team to do this.
Right.
So we had to figure out another way of doing it. So we did figure out another way of doing it, but which kind of netted in them looking at some businesses that we presented, and they bought 3 out of 18 that we presented. But this was all through the pandemic year, and this was all in lockdown, and you
Right.
had to get really nimble and really quick on how you were going to structure that kind of growth. Cut long story short, you move to December 2020. I'm back in the UK, and I'm in Windsor. Most people think of Windsor for Windsor Castle, but I'm at the hospital because we were coming out in those little groups of 5 or 6 in the middle of the pandemic,
Right.
pre-vaccine, right?
Yeah.
So as I'm in, and so like many hospitals, the place I'm in, you've always got this disinfectant smell. And I'm in my consultant's office, and I could look out one side and see this car park, just for for people that are listening to this that can't see. Um, and then onto the left, I've got all Mark's awards down one side, and he kind of leans into his desk with a white coat on, looking over the top of his glasses, and kind of starts the conversation to say, Mark, it's the news I've got isn't great, and sometimes you get bad news in business,
Yeah.
but when you get bad news in life, and you're told you've got 6 months to live because you've got stage 4 cancer, it kind of stops everything in one moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given your fight or flight says, I'm going to beat it. And that's exactly where, I was. But you've got parallel streams of thought going on at the same time as my wife,
Yeah.
my kids. Well, how do I survive? How do I beat this? And so you're just taking everything in, but you can't process anything in the moment. But the one thing we did decide was that in private, in the UK, you could get hospital spaces, but no one else could because every bed and corridor was taken by COVID patients.
Yeah.
So I find myself in hospital in January 2020. They took out the cancer in the hope that they could do something with the secondaries and maybe give me a few more months.
Mm-hmm.
But while I'm there, I get the original strain of COVID. So I've got that to recover from. Then I've got COVID, and there's no vaccines coming in. So obviously they want me out of the hospital, so they get me as well as they could, as quickly as they could post operation. And I'm now back at home in our bedroom's a big white bedroom with a view out over rolling hills, which was great when I was ill. And then to the left, you've got this dressing room, walking through to an ensuite and a door in the corner. So my son Tommy pops in every day at 7, 11, lunchtime, afternoon, tea time, bedtime. And for him, lockdown was a different experience to me because when I got COVID, my 6 months, like everyone else's, went to 28 days. Because you remember back then, that first 12 days, none of us knew where we were going.
Yeah.
Because it was new for all of us, right?
Yeah.
And so, but for Tommy, it was like he could play Xbox every day because nothing was happening at school.
Yep.
And we were talking about that all the time through that week. But towards the end of the week, you run out of Xbox chat because I wasn't an Xbox player. And then he walked in one afternoon or one evening, actually, and I've got a call coming in from San Francisco from a friend of mine called Angela. And she said to me, "Hi, how are you? How's it going on?" Or in her voice, "Hi, how are you?"
Mm-hmm.
But, and then she said, "You don't sound very good." And I said, "Well, I've just had cancer up and I got COVID." And she said, "Why are you talking to me?" I said, "Well, I thought you needed some help with something." And she said, "I'm going to send." So she sends me this document, which is what to do with COVID patients. And so the first thing you do is you sit them up. You don't let them lie down because you got more lung capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And my SATs went from 89 to 95 in about 20 minutes. And then I spent 3 nights bolt upright in a chair because it's the only way I could be comfortable and keep my SATs at a high enough level while I got through the worst of it, as it turned out. But I'm still talking to Tommy about business and stuff because at this point I'm thinking I've got 10 or 12 days to go. I don't know whether I'm going to make it. And you have this real terrible realization that you thought you left your family and your kids enough fish.
Right.
And you realize you should have taught them to fish.
Mm.
So we've run out of Xbox conversation and we're chatting about business. And one of the things I said to him was 9 out of 10 companies that come to market to get sold don't get sold. And he was, "Well, why is that, Dad?" And I said, "Well, because often the price they'd like to get and need to get is more than the market's willing to pay, John."
Yep.
And immediately he said, "Well, so what happens to them?" And I said, "Well, they end up not getting sold, which means, the owners, the mums and dads and of those businesses, like me, that aren't able to sell, they keep working in them."
Mm-hmm.
And quick as a flash, he said, "So what happens, Dad, to those businesses if their mums and dads catch COVID and die?" Just think about that for a minute.
Yep.
What happens to them? And then he says, what happens to their families? Who's going to take care of them? Because he's seeing the news reports, John, that we were all seeing. League tables of death all around the world and new infections is basically what we were seeing. And he's seeing it and it's top of his mind. And he's worried about the 9 companies that can't sell because their families may not be able to do anything, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I thought, oh, bloody hell, but what do you do? And there wasn't anything I could do in that moment. But we spoke about it and he said, you should be working with the 9 out of 10 companies, Dad. They need your help. The 1 out of 10, that some of which you can buy and some of which you can't buy.
Right.
They don't need your help. Someone's going to buy them. But he just came back to, and you need to help them because what happens to their mums and dads? So I promised that I'd start looking at it. But my son is a kid that doesn't forget anything. And so 3 months later, he's reminding me. 6 months later, he's reminding me. By this time, I've gone back, and it turned out to see how the operation had gone, and they couldn't find the cancer, but they didn't know why. And we don't know this for sure, John, but they think that my consultant then said to me, he thinks that getting the original strain of COVID helped cure the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm like, bottle it, get it out to the world. We can save everybody. He's going, no, Mark, that's not what I mean. And so when I pressed him, and he wasn't really keen to talk about it because they're not, unless they've got
Sure.
hard
Yeah.
facts. They think that it kicked my immune system into overdrive, and it turns out that your immune system is an amazing defense mechanism for us human beings if it's in reasonably good nick. And I was lucky enough to be in reasonably good nick. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I exercise a lot, and I take a lot of supplements. All of that stuff helped my immune system to be in great shape, which then they think cleared out the secondary cancers that I had. That when I had a PET scan, I lit up like a Christmas tree.
Wow.
And so from then, being reminded by my son about the 9 out of 10, I started to think about how could I do this? What would be the answer? And it took me a couple of years to figure out what the answer was, if I'm honest. I'm not the brightest tool in the box. But the part of the answer was to write a book, John.
Yeah.
And that's how the book came into being, because although I would only help people at that time, maybe a dozen companies at a go, a book could get to everybody. And so that was how the book came into being. And when you're in private equity, what you do is you buy a company at the lowest point that you can, and you build value over 7 years, and then you sell it for the maximum that you can get for it. And so the answer that was so obvious and hiding in plain sight was, well, instead of buying it and building it and then selling it, why don't you partner with these business owners that fall into this 9 out of 10 category and help them along the way? Because they still got all the expertise, but there's a bunch of things that private equity can do that they can't do. And together you can get to that endpoint faster, and they get a much better exit, and private equity still makes a lot of money, but not as much money.
Right.
Now, in the private equity world that I was in, that wasn't going to fly because they're greedy. But in my world, it would. So that kind of moved towards moving away from the pure play private equity to helping businesses cross that gap. You see, because what happens is you find that a lot of businesses that you might like to buy are maybe they need 10 times more, for example, when they want to sell it than the market's going to pay for it. And everybody will tell you that it's the greedy brokers that act like estate agents or realtors that overvalue it, John. And it's not. It's just that in too many cases, in a sub 75 million revenue business, the owner realizes far too late that up to 50% of the sticker price they get is going to be going towards the tax man, state and federal, and other fees and broker fees and other people that want to stick their greedy fat little fingers into their life's work and take a piece of it, which doesn't leave them enough. But they didn't realize until too late. So they're forced to keep the business because they got bills to pay, and they end up working in that business in their 70s and sometimes their 80s. It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
So their passion can become an albatross around their neck eventually. What they started probably with their passion, but that point. So what are some of the things that so the idea of going from in 7 years going to 100 million, sounds like fantastic, right? But a lot of people will just go, that sounds fantastic, but how do I even start on that journey?
So I break this down into a 3-legged stool with an extra leg if you want a 4-legged stool. So the first thing that I should say is 100 million is a big number, and 7 years or less seems too far ahead. And actually, it doesn't have to be 100 million, because 10 million is still life-changing for most people, especially if you can save on the tax. But the process and the methodology, John, are the same. So in very loose terms, and I cover this in 12 chapters in the book, the 3-legged stool is the first part of that is what I call the the growth accelerator. And I color it red because I think of it as a Ferrari. It's when everything is exciting and you're going to market. You'll know this because you've been involved in startups in Silicon Valley, right? So in the 90s, there was another one popping up every week, one closing down at some, when the dot-com bubble hit as well. But there's another exciting business getting funding, and not all businesses get funding, but it's growing and it's exciting, and you're doing a lot of organic growth. And the first stage is just get some money to pay some bills. Nobody thinks about profit. The next step is, oh my God, we're making a little bit more money. We've now got an EBITDA, and you're still taking it down, but you're beginning to move in the right direction. And then you could start partnering and working with other people, or in this day and age, take advantage of the internet,
Yeah.
YouTube, and everything else as part of your strategy to grow a bit quicker, but you're still organically growing. Now, you want to partner for growth as much as you can, but get up to 5 million. But most importantly, you start working on an EBITDA of 15%. Now, it doesn't have to be 15%,
Right.
but to scale quickly, to get to that lofty goal, whether it's 10 million, 30 million, 50 million, or 100 million in value, John, you do want a bit of cash behind you to co-invest with money that's going to be invested in you later.
Yeah.
So if you're doing 5 million top line with 750K, you got quite a lot of maneuverability, providing you're not taking all the money out.
Yeah.
To start accelerating your growth. And then you'll move from that phase, John, into what I call the Lamborghini phase. That's the scaling accelerator. That's the scale accelerator engine. So what happens there is you increasingly grow by acquisition. Now, why do I say that? I say it because you might take 4 years to get a business to, let's say, a top line of between 2 and 5 million in top line. But you could double the value, you could double the size of a business in a day if you bought another one. The trick is, can you buy another one without using much of your own money? And in a lot of cases, you can.
Right.
Not in all cases, but you're building revenue and profitability quickly. And the more that you grow from 5 to 10, and certainly 10 to 20, and 20 to 40, and 40 to 80, you're doing it increasingly by scaling the business by acquiring, as well as organically growing by buying businesses that can cross-sell and upsell to each other. Those two things are very, very simple. Now, there's a lot of other things that you can do as well, but focus on those two core strategies for that immediate scale. Now, when you get into year, now I call it the Lamborghini phase, John, because in the Ferrari phase, it's all about growth. Now, Ferruccio Lamborghini said, when you're on the way up and you're on the way to making it, you buy a Ferrari. When you've made it,
you buy a
Lamborghini. Now, of course, Lamborghinis are coming in all sorts of exotic and beautiful colors. I just happen to like the yellow one. So as I developed the system, I picked yellow for that.
Right.
Now, the next bit makes no sense, and I'll explain why. And it makes no sense in that as you get to year 4, in wherever you want to be, you might be wanting to grow to 20. You might be wanting to grow to 100. It's the same process that I can show people how to do at every step of the way. You just decide on what that number is going to be, and you stick to that margin, and off you go. You get to the point where you start to prepare for the exit. Now, half of the wealth that you create in life, I'll say that again, half of the wealth that you create in life in broad terms, and if anybody's listening or watching and they can grab a pen, grab it, because I want you to write this down if you can, is half of it is making it. The other half of it is John is keeping it.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in California or if you're in New York, there are all sorts of official institutions that want to put their greedy fat little fingers in what you've built, what your legacy is.
Absolutely.
And 40% of it in those two states will go to state and federal. And another 10%, if you're working with a broker, goes to a broker. Maybe it might be 8%, could be 12%, but it's a substantial sum. And then you've got these other greedy little people that want to stick their fingers in the pie for no apparent reason. And they'll take another 4, 5, 6, or 7% collectively. Now you find 55% maybe, or it could be as low as 35%, because it's the same problem all over the world, John.
Yeah.
But the amounts that different governments and people take does vary. So it's 35 to 55. It's going to go somewhere else. When it's on the way to your bank, it seems to go to someone else's bank. So you start to think about structuring there, and that's about having the right leadership team in play, having the right systems and processes and procedures in play. Now, controversially, I worry about this from year 4 to 7. I don't worry about it too much. A lot of people will say, buy a business and integrate it. I will say, do not do that. Buy a business and keep it segregated, but cross-pollinate from a growth point of view. Do not integrate your systems at that time.
So you mean by the companies you acquire, don't integrate them fully? Is that it?
No, don't integrate them fully at that time.
Okay.
And the reason for that is you don't know who your buyer is. So if you go and let's take you, for example, because you run a CRM business,
Sure.
which is really good in the mid-market, and you guys have done a great job from going from your startup, organically bootstrapping and growing your business to the successful big thing that it is right now. And you'll have a load of customers that use your product.
Yep.
Now, your kind of product does make sense to potentially introduce to another business, but that isn't an integration. That is an extension, right? But when you go to but it might not make sense in all situations, because if I bought a business that had Salesforce, then there would definitely be some cost synergies in coming across to you and getting away
Sure.
from Salesforce, without
Yeah.
a doubt. But there'd be so much disruption, it might not be worth it
Gotcha. Yeah.
at
Yeah.
that point, because actually downstream, if you then sold the entities to a bigger organization that's got Salesforce, then they're going to keep with Salesforce and integrate everything onto that. But you don't know who your buyer is.
Right.
So if
Right.
you've got systems, ops, processes, and procedures running, keep them running, unless the pain of not doing so is so great that you've got to make some kind of change, right?
Yeah.
So keep them running, because you don't know where that end game's going to be.
It is interesting because, I mean, I've seen myself, like, firsthand or whatever, how integrating businesses can be it can be so disruptive,
Yeah.
but it can also end up being a disaster. Like, I've seen where somebody tried to integrate like about 6 businesses at one time into one mega business, and it ended up like a complete disaster at the end of the
Yeah.
day. But I think people underestimate how difficult it can be to integrate
Yeah,
businesses.
they do. And my background, coming from IT, similar to you, is I've done a lot of these transformational integrations, and they come with a lot of problems. And the byproduct is people go absolutely demented in trying to make it work, and they end up leaving because they're not happy anymore. And you've lost
Yeah.
the essence and the lifeblood and the real value in a business, which is the people. So I try and delay that, but there's an awful lot of preparation to do to make sure you've got the solid management team that's going to run the overall entities, so that you, as the owner, John, can leave sooner than you thought, because you've got a solid team of people in play behind you, so that you, as the owner, John, are not seen as the key figurehead through which all decisions are made. This is important, and you can do that in those stages too, as well as start to structure for life after the sale, tax-free. Now, I can normally show a tax-free structure individually to people. So if anybody that's listening to you and your show wants to get more insight into that, for the very first time ever, I'm quite happy for them to contact me with your permission, and I'll walk them through a generic way in which they, in their situation, might or might not be able to think about getting out tax-free. It will be generic. It won't be tailored to them. Now, it doesn't work for everybody, but what does work is, if you can't go tax-free, 9 times out of 10, I can help somebody see something which is tax minimized. And tax minimized is very important, because the more money that you can save and put in your bank account prior to the sale, the more you've got to invest post-sale in other very tax advantage structures. But when you're losing half of it before you can invest any of it, you're automatically disadvantaged, and that's not fair. Now, I would say, John, I would say that many businesses are in a position where, if they're worth, let's say, 2 million, and they were going to lose half of it in tax, that's a lot of money to lose. But being left with 1 million means that 2 million isn't enough to retire on for most people anyway.
No, absolutely.
So we end up looking at ways in which we would help somebody see what they could do to minimize the tax position, but they've got to grow the value of it. And so sometimes there's ways in which we could help them see, or help them do, a growth plan on that business to get it from a 2 million val to a 10 million val, without them having to spend any money, without them having to restructure the business, without them having to invest a shit ton more in marketing and things like that. Please excuse my language. I hope that wasn't appropriate. So that they can get to that position much more quickly, and we'll find buyers for them as well.
And there's a lot of people that are in that situation. I mean, I know there's a neighbor of mine used to live near me here, and we had that conversation one day. He had a great business, water softening business or whatever. And it was, I think, I can't remember how many million it did a year. It was like did 3 or 4 or 5 million, something like that a year. But his issue is exactly what you're talking about. He said to me, he goes like, it's not enough for me to sell the business and cash out, right? You know, I have other things, but I'm also struggling with, I've hit a ceiling, like, and I've hit this is my serviceable market right now. So there's a lot of people who end up like that, where they have really nice businesses, but they're not enough to sell and cash out. So to your point, is the ability to be able to go on and maybe scale a little more in order to be able to make it more, to make it a better exit.
Yeah. So and the challenge that I see that I don't want to say private equity plays on this, because that's not fair. They don't. But I do want to say that, but it's not true. They don't. But what happens is you've got millions of successful business owners that have been doing their thing for 20 or 30 years. And the water softener example that you're giving is absolutely brilliant, because it is a business that will scale to 5 million, and then you do get stuck. But the only thing
Yeah.
that business owner lacks is a map that shows them the way to scaling the business to double the size and value, double the size and profit, but it will exponentially increase the value. A map to show them
Hmm.
how to position the business so that when it does get sold at much more money, that they pay much less tax. So in
Hmm.
that, I'm going to imagine that your friend lives in California, just for this example. So selling a 5
Yeah, yeah,
million
yeah.
business, he's making, I don't know what profit he's making. Let's say he's making $1 million on that. 20% margin is pretty decent. So $1 million on
Hmm.
that would make him worth 5 million. So he's worth turnover, let's say,
Yeah.
and then he's going to lose half of it. 2.5 is not enough, right? So
Hmm.
imagine that we could do one simple thing to take him from 5 to 10, still at 20%. He's now
Yeah.
making 2. He's now worth 10. Or he might even, if I could do that with a
Hmm.
third one and take him to 15, and not much cost or effort. And because if it took him 20 years to get to the 5, and in 20 months or less than that, in 7 months get him to 15, he's going to think organic, and I'm going to think all my experience in private equity and growing companies all over the world. How do you do that faster? And now he's at 15, making 20% of 15 is 3. Now he's worth 15 to 18. Now the trick is, could you get him out with zero tax? Possibly, but he'd have to work with me on a structure that I would suggest and follow it. And if he didn't want to do that, then maybe you could get that tax down to single digits. So let's go single
Hmm.
digits on a 15 mil or 18 mil. Single digits might be, I don't know, 5%. So, well, it's a bit low, I would say, maybe 7%. I can't even work that out, but it's a shit ton less than 50%. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So then
absolutely.
you've taken it and you've tripled it, and you've reduced the burden on it when it's sold. But even if you didn't, he'd be happier than Larry, because he's got so much more to sort of play with. But now you're in a life-changing position where you do have the opportunity to not only enjoy the rest of your retirement, but have something substantive that you could pass on as legacy to the ones that you want to pass it on to. Whereas you couldn't do that before.
Yeah.
And it's not a fair return on investment. People work hard all their lives to get to that point. So it's just lacking the map that shows them the way to get to that next level. Sorry, John, you were trying to say something,
Yeah.
and I was passionately
No, 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 no.
rambling on.
Yeah, no, no, no. I was just listening along. No, and I was saying that to a lot of people, like the idea of acquiring or adding on or whatever, that sounds like a complicated thing to a lot of people, right? It sounds like, number one, like, how could I afford it? Number two, like, this seems like, I mean, especially if, say, you have a $5 million business and you want to like bolt on something else, it seems like I barely have my hands around my own business. How do I add in another one? I think there's a lot of maybe limiting beliefs that people have around something like
Yeah, there
this.
are, and when you approach it from that perspective, the natural thing to do is, oh my God, I have got to do this. I have got to write
There
a
you go.
check for this. So,
Hmm.
so I run an academy, and one of the people in my academy is a great guy called James, and so he runs a 10 million business, and he's exactly that person. I want to grow it. He wants to grow it to 100 million, but in his 10 million
Hmm.
business, he makes a good profit. He's got no debt. Because the funny thing is, when you get to a 4 million profit or a 5 million profit is in EBITDA, you probably don't have a lot of debt because you're paying it down, because you still got that in profit, right?
Yep.
And so, but he's thinking, I've got to write a check. I can't do it. I can't do it. So what we did in the academy was unstick that. And because he's got a good business that we'd helped position to that level, our positioning to that level was 5%. He'd already done it. It just needed repositioning a little bit. And
Hmm.
normally there's a lot more to do. But then we could bring family office money to this. We're lucky enough to have the support of 22 billion of family office money behind us, because they love what we do,
Hmm.
and they
Right.
love the story of how we got there. It's the cancer story that I told you in the beginning. But the
Hmm.
business issue for family offices and private equity is They would like to buy many of these businesses that are overpriced, and they don't buy them because they're
Mhm.
overpriced, but they understand why they are.
Yep.
So they walk on by, they never come back. So when I'm working with a business and you go, let's slightly reposition it, and you can go to 100 million, you've got to change the mindset a little bit and pull James out of the day-to-day operation and put somebody in underneath that so he can work on the
Mhm.
overall structure because he's got all the subject matter expertise and leave me to raise the money. So we bring the partners to the conversation, which in this case is a family office, and they love it, and they're co-partnering to take it to 100 million, and then they'll cash out on that
Mhm.
together, and that just changes the game because he doesn't have to write the check now. He doesn't. They're investing along for the ride, so not just in buying all of his business, but being an investor for a piece of the business, and then providing the working capital that's needed to make other acquisitions. But the big thing that
Right.
owners fear is they got to write the check, but actually there's a queue of people that would line up to lend money on very favorable terms that are very affordable to business owners, and they can pay for that debt that they're taking on to buy other businesses out of their future predictable profits. So, and
Mhm.
we get involved in helping a lot of people unstick themselves there and also prepare to be able to sell the business for life changes amount of money, amounts of money, tax free or tax minimized. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I think the other thing too is that I think people often think of, private equity or family offices or any of those like venture capital. They tend to see them all as the same, and they think, okay, the minute I get involved with somebody like that, they're going to be, on my shoulder. They're going to be telling me what to do. I have no control anymore. I think people underestimate the fact that there are lots of different types of ones, and part of the goal at the end of the day is it has to be a match,
Yeah.
right? You have to be able to work together, you have to click together, you have to have, so finding the right people to work with, and the fact is they're not all the same. Lots of people operate very differently. Some are very hands on, some are very hands off, some are, it's up to you.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better. But private equity can be culturally disruptive. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
But you get the right private equity partners, then they are, and there's different private equity, small cap, mid cap, large cap, that are right for the different stages of the journey that you're at. So this isn't
Yeah.
a client of ours, but um, a a Irish gentleman in the IT sector inside the business wanted to go on the same journey that John is in, that James is in my academy. And so, with the right
Mhm.
private equity play, they were able to bring money to buy another business. They've gone from 20 million to 200 million in 4 years because they got the right
Wow.
partnership along the way, partnering with the expertise to get to an end journey. And that private equity
Hmm.
player is now saying, "Look, we think we've taken you as far as we can. You need a bigger partner now." And so they're trying to bring in a
Wow.
bigger partner in to go from 200 million to a billion, right? But
Yeah.
it's not difficult to do this if you have a system, and of course you need to get to a point of having a decent business from a financial performance point of view. So a lot of people worry about that. So when I wrote the book, it can help everybody get to a level, um, and um, and then beyond a certain level, we can help accelerate it with the book, or they can chat with us, and we'll sort of talk them through a lot of the fundamentals, to from where they are to where they want to be in a fraction of the time. It's just a lot of people don't know this, and then they certainly don't
Hmm.
know. Well, then how do I keep most of the money? And we'll all and
Yeah.
now I can't always tax free, but until I talk to people individually,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
then you don't. Then I don't know whether I'm going to tax minimize or tax
Hey,
free it.
Hey, listen, any dollar that you can keep in your pocket that doesn't go to some tax person, to me, is a good deal.
Exactly, John. It's and I knew I was onto something when the book went live. Several weeks later, Amazon banned it, and I was like, "What's going
Ah,
on?" So they're not that communicative. But I wrote to them and said, "Look, what did I do anything wrong? Let me know." And they went copyright. So the book was copyrighted, so I showed them all of that.
right.
And then I tried to think about what it is, and tax free is quite an aggressive title. And so I wrote to them and said,
Mm,
maybe you don't like the title, but if you think about it, all I'm doing is sharing at the mid-market level
yeah,
what people like Bezos, surprising, their bosses, and Musk and
yeah,
everyone else are doing. But people don't realize they can do it too if they have the right approach on a smaller scale, but they can do similar things, not the same things. And so about 6 weeks later, I got relisted, but they never, ever, ever said, we banned you because I was kind of thinking, well, you got
Yeah.
relisted. They maybe listened and thought, okay, it's fair enough, and put it back on. But they never said that, so I can't say that that was the reason. But I knew I was,
Yeah, but
you know,
that sounds, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're gonna raise some red flags when you're saying
yeah,
tax-free because of the amount of, the biggest industry, is bureaucracy that feeds
yeah,
off
yeah, yeah.
of our taxes.
Yeah, and so anybody
So,
that wants to, that so if any of the authorities wanted to challenge that and say, well, you can't say that unless it's true, that's fine. I'll sit them down and show it's why it's true. But but they know it's true, so they're not sort
Yeah,
of interfering with it. So there's a path to it, and in the academy I run, I've got a 19-year-old, and the 19-year-old just wants to be a digital nomad. And he's on the
right.
and all he wants to do is create digital product. He's got a particular story that he can tell, and that digital product
Mhm.
would maybe make him 500 to $1,000 a month. Now, in his case, when he was 13, he had a problem with drugs, and it was very nearly going to
Right.
go the wrong way with the police getting involved. But the police were really good because they knew he was good, and he was mixing with the wrong crowd, and his family were really good. So they did everything they could to bend over backwards to support getting him back in the right direction. And actually, the trigger moment for him was his dad got him out of the country on an 8-week summer holiday trip because they knew that was the time that they couldn't always control what he
Mm,
was doing, and that was the turning point.
right.
Now he's got a story on his path to back to he would never look at drugs or anything like that. So they were lucky to get him back. But his story is not for other kids of his age, it's for the parents. Because parents pull their hair out, they don't know what
Mm,
to do. So he's kind of thinking of that as a digital product, but then he's thinking if I can get that right and understand the processes of how that works in this AI age, I could do other digital things, Dad, and they could make money in my sleep. So he's moving from being a consumer to being a creator, but with a process and a structure.
mm,
And even if he doesn't make it, if he makes it to 5 million, it's a success. A success. If he makes it to 100 million, it's unbelievable. But he said, if I can get to that level, even if I don't make it, what I've learned is going to position me to earn for years, Dad. And if I do make it, I can teach
yeah,
anyone else of my age how to do it and make money doing it with them. And I'm thinking, how cool is that? But he's starting from zero. So we're trying, so we're structuring that from the beginning. But most of the time, you, the great thing for him is so I said to him, I said, well, that's cool. If you made it, you got your school fees paid and your
yeah,
mortgage paid. He said, well, the mortgage I get that. He said,
yeah.
but I don't, I um, don't forget, at that point, I won't even have a girlfriend, let alone kids. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. No, it's a great, and think about, I mean, the world that the kids live in today, like the opportunities, like to be
Mm.
digital nomads and everything like that. It's just incredible. It's not like our travel experiences
No,
back in the day. I'll tell
yeah,
you that much. That's for sure.
yeah. We'd have to beg and steal and borrow to get a job, but these guys can
Yeah,
make money off
exactly,
their phones
exactly,
wherever they are. And if they're not in a country for longer
exactly.
than 3 months, they probably don't have to pay any tax either. So good luck to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So just keep hopping around. Well, listen, Mark, this has been fascinating. So much fantastic information. All of Mark's information will be below this video. But again, before we go, Mark, remind people what you do.
Yeah, so we help businesses scale from wherever they are now to wherever they want to be in terms of revenue and value in their business, and then exit them tax free or tax minimized if we can't do it tax free. So what does that mean? It means
Mhm.
that you could go to 100 million in 7 years or less and exit tax free. A lot of people want to do a smaller hop. You might want to go to 20 million in 3 years and exit tax free, right? So the process and the journey is the same. So we help businesses do that. And so if anybody wants to get a view as to what their business might be worth or what a tax free for them might look like, then in a generic sense, because I don't want to get people to give me detailed information unless they really want to do that, and we can do that too. But in a
Sure.
generic sense, reach out to a link that I'll make available to you, either through a QR code or they can email me, and I'll happily, set aside some time to hop on a call for half an hour with people from your audience that feel that might be useful. No cost, no charge. It's not a setup to sell them
Mm.
something in the future. People are going to do their own thing, but it will open their eyes on what the possibilities are, and then they can take it forward from there.
Yeah, fantastic. Listen, that's fantastic. Well, I encourage people to take advantage of it because, like I said, every dollar you can keep in your own pocket is it's a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll send you a link. I'll give you a link tree code, John, and on that they can buy a copy of the book if they want to, but they can get a free PDF version of the book as well. And
Mm.
my email is in there. and all they've got to do is email me and say, you know, friend of John's, and I'll know what it is, and I'll send them a link. But they can even take, I think there's a Calendly link. They can book a slot in my diary, and all they've got to do is say, friend of John's, heard the podcast, you know, would like some help. And for those people that do, I'll let you know which ones do.
Yeah, and that, again, all that information will be below. Well, listen, thanks again, Mark. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you all again very soon.
Thank you for having me, John.